Hey, Wargamers. Thanks for joining us. I'm here with Rob from Preferred Enemies. He is one of the lucky folks who has access to codices upon the pre-order date, and he's gracious enough to talk about it with us. So, Rob, thanks for coming on.
Hey, no problem. Glad to help.
Yeah. So, really, we're just going to go through some commonly asked or at least asked questions. I don't know how commonly they're asked, but someone asked them. So let's dive into it.
All right. Well, yeah, we got a preview copy of the Codex, and we went ahead and put out to our listeners, like, what are the questions you want answered about the Codex? What questions do you have about how Tau are changing or not changing, as the case may be? And so just kind of take it from the top and work down until either we run out of time or I run out of questions. So first one that somebody asked, and this one comes up a couple of times, is what kind of synergy were we seeing in the Codex? And I'm going to say right off the bat, it's pretty much the same kind of synergy you saw in the Index. I mean, Cadre Fireblades still buff up surrounding Fire Warriors. Ethereals still have the same elemental invocation abilities that they had before. Drones pretty much do the same thing. This is not an army where they've added in anything like banner carriers or chaplains or anything, something that would provide extra bubbles beyond that. There's a couple of warlord traits that provide stuff like that, but some of those we'd already seen, like Exemplar of the Montka and Exemplar of the Callion from Chapter Approved are in here. They do the exact same thing. So there's really, if there wasn't synergy before, it hasn't been added. But I mean, your main source of synergy, and I'm going to air quote that a bit, is marker lights. Marker lights are still good. You're still going to want to have access to them in your army. And the uplink marker light stratagem, which they had in Chapter Approved, is still a fantastic way to maximize how much you get out of your marker light units. I know a lot of people haven't been using marker lights that much competitively because up until now it's been a lot of commanders and drones, and obviously with some of the other things that we're going to be talking about, that is no longer the case. So I think there's going to be more emphasis on having at least some marker light support in your army and being able to use it to its fullest.
Yeah, I can think of two instances where there is a modicum of increased synergy, and that is the Wall of Mirrors stratagem.
Yes.
I think so. There is a built-in synergy there, and so Wall of Mirrors basically allows you to redeploy a unit of stealth suits in proximity to a ghost kill. So right there's a direct interaction between those two units, and so you do have synergy between those two units. But then there's a secondary synergy that comes from the stealth suits having a homing beacon. And correct me if I'm wrong, but now the homing beacon has to be deployed at the beginning of the movement phase. Is that correct?
Let me confirm that.
Okay, I'll keep going while you're checking that then. So let's assume I'm right. And
that you are correct. Start a movement phase.
Okay. All right, so that's a big change because before you used to have to, where you could move and then put the homing beacon down and then deep strike on top of it. But now you have to have your stealth suits in position early enough to make that actually happen. And from a deployment situation, that can be challenging because you don't want to have your stealth suits, up close and personal with the enemy on the top of turn one, just in case you don't go first. So with Wall of Mirrors, you can deploy more conservatively, use Wall of Mirrors to slingshot your stealth suits closer to the enemy forces. They still have to stay 9 inches away, but that's the stealth suits. Then you could drop the homing beacon. I think it's 1 inch away from the stealth suits, and then whatever you deep strike has to be within 6 inches of the homing beacon. So you can get 7 inches away, or you could get up to 2 inches away from the enemy unit if you want to deep strike on top of them using this kind of slingshot, homing beacon, deep strike combination. So there's a secondary synergy between ghost kills, stealth suits, and let's say crisis suits or crisis commanders, if you want to do that, that allows them to deep strike in a more aggressive way and avoid some of the negative consequences of having to put the homing beacon down before you move.
Yeah, and there's, granted, that's a fair number of moving parts. You've got to learn how to play it properly. One good thing, though, is that because Wall of Mirrors also activates at the start of a movement phase, it's your turn, so you get to choose what order that occurs in. So you could slingshot them forward with the Wall of Mirrors, drop the beacon down, and then you still have your movement. So you can still pull them back 8 inches. And if you're playing, for example, Viorla, you can still advance them, get that extra movement to get them somewhere else that you want them, and also not give up any accuracy on their weapons. So there's pieces that do work well together, but it's that very limited kind of synergy where a couple of units key off of each other, but there's not like the army-wide synergy that you see in some other armies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Another example is the command and control node stratagem, which I'm sure will come up again in a minute. But I mean, that's a built-in synergy where, well, I don't know if it's necessarily synergy, but it's an interaction where the commander is able to buff a battlesuit unit. And this is pretty different than what we had before, where it was commanders generally in isolation surrounded by drones. So now you have an interaction between commanders and other battlesuits that you didn't have before. But like you said, that's a relatively minor interaction compared to the army-wide buffs that we see in other codices. There's also the issue of a reduced interaction, or it's not really an antagonism, but it's a less positive synergy with savior protocols, where now you have to roll a 2-up. So, yeah, you're still probably going to get it, but it's not guaranteed, and so that's something you have to build in. And so they kind of dampened that a little bit, and then tweak these other things a little bit.
I think they kind of had to, though. It was, drones were too obvious a choice, and between the tweak to savior protocols, which, like you said, is still mostly effective, but there's always a chance of failure, and the increased cost of gun drones, that brings drones down to a point where they are not must takes; they're good to haves. And also, I think with the change in commanders only being able to have 1 per detachment, that build of I have a bunch of really good commanders so that I absolutely have to protect them, because now you only have 1 commander. You're going to have take more things. You're not going to be trying to protect everything with drones anymore. So there's a little bit less incentive to take quite as many. So I think it all works to get the army closer to where they want it. A couple of the changes, especially like the commander change, is kind of a heavy-handed one, and it's one that we don't see in any other army. But I don't know. I've seen some people online argue about, well, they should have just done it with point costs or something like that. But you don't want to make the commanders so expensive that they suddenly become a bad choice either. So,
here's my thing about the commander limitation is it doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't feel good to have, it be a 0-1 choice per detachment, because everybody wants to play with what they want to play with. And that's kind of been the way that GW has approached the game for, a little while now, is that you should be able to play with what you want. And so that kind of abrupt change is a little jarring for some people. But really, if this is where GW wanted us to be, is having, 1 commander per detachment, essentially, there's 2 ways they could do that. One is putting this hard cap, and the other is to increase the point level significantly. And so faced with those 2 options, I have to say, well, if they increase the points, I would get 1 commander per detachment and end up paying a whole bunch more points. Or with a hard cap, I'm still getting this super efficient unit plus all the other stuff that I can spend those extra points on. So yeah, it doesn't feel good, and it doesn't seem like it's necessarily a nuanced way to solve the problem. But I get an extra 100 points, let's say, of stuff that can shoot also, that I wouldn't get if they just increased the points of commanders by 100 points. So it's kind of a silver lining, I guess.
Yeah. And also having more options for commanders now with the XV8, the XV85, and also the Cold Star having the ability to take 4 full hard points rather than being locked in on weaponry. It's a few more options. It's more flexibility. Although, I mean, really the difference between the 8 and the 85 is 1 wound and 4 points. So it's not, I think that could have been a more drastic change.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I mean, it's still, it's more flexibility. I think the Cold Star becomes I mean, it was already a good choice. It becomes a much better choice now.
Yeah.
And I imagine you're going to, I mean, even on the Warhammer community site, they were pushing the 4 Fusion Blaster Cold Star as a viable option. So
yeah, that I feel like that sends mixed messages. Only take 1 commander per detachment, but make sure that he just destroys whatever he means. Like,
well, hey, if you're going to limit me to 1, I'm going to make him a killers.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think Cold Stars are going to be pretty prevalent now. Just that flexibility, and then being able to move up to 40 inches, and if you're Viorla or have the Monka Warlord trait, not suffer any penalties seems pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, when Chapter Approved came out, I was running this is of course before the Codex. I was running a Cold Star with Exemplar of the Monka, and yeah, just absolutely abusing being able to move 40 inches a turn and fire at full effectiveness. So big fan.
Yeah.
And although somebody else brought up the fact that, Custodes get multiple shield captains on jet bikes in a Supreme Command detachment. So, yeah, like you said, it's not a feel-good, but at the same time, Custode stuff costs so much. Let's give them something, because they're not going to have nearly as many models on the board as we can move. So,
right.
Let's see. Somebody else asked, which is better now, high-yield missile pods for the broadside or the rail rifle? Especially now that the cost has come down on the broadside and it's become a more viable option. I really think it comes down to what you want to do with it, especially now that seeker missiles do not do mortal wounds anymore. Rail weapons are one of our main ways to inflict mortal wounds occasionally. So if you're looking for something that if you hit is going to probably wound and is going to stick it if you land it and has a chance to do a mortal wound, the heavy rail rifle is not a bad choice. But the biggest problem is you've still got a ballistic skill of 4 up, and even if you're re-rolling 1s with the help of a marker light, there's a good shot that there's a good chance you're going to land 0 shots, and so that's something you have to weigh. Also, in Overwatch, the high yield missile pod can't be beat. Having 8 missile pod shots going at you, and especially if you're running the Tau sept tenet where you're hitting an Overwatch on 5s and 6s, you can really put the hurt on somebody if they charge you. So I'm still a fan of the high yield missile pod build, but there's definitely a space for the heavy rail rifle.
Yeah, I think I haven't done the math on it yet, but I still think the high yield missile pod is probably the probably the more generalist choice. Certainly, the place that you're going to want the heavy rail rifle is a little bit limited in terms of the targets that it's going to be a better choice for are probably also going to be targeted by some of your other options that are going to be a little bit more efficient. So yeah, and I'm not sure if the broadsides are really, if they got a big enough point decrease to really be something that I'm going to consider seriously in a competitive environment, just because for just a little bit more I can get a Riptide with a heavy burst cannon, or for a little bit less I can get a hammerhead or something. Yeah.
Well, let's actually look at some of those point cost changes, because this is one of the things we brought up on our show, which isn't out yet by the time you hear this. But for example, the Riptide with the heavy burst cannon. And this is before the dual extra weapons you have on it or any support systems you put on it. But just the base model and the main weapon, the heavy burst cannon is Riptide's now 220 points before extra weapons, but a high yield missile pod broadside is now down to 110. So yeah, it's 52 points cheaper than it was before. So it's a significant drop. And if you go heavy rail rifle, it's 95 points before you add Now, that, again, that's before you add smart missiles
Right.
or plasma onto it. But
So that's at least 30 points, or at least 22 points, right?
it's actually a
24 points.
48-point drop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because it went from 143 to 95 for the combo. So it's
No, I was wondering. So his smart missile systems are 15 points now, right? So that's 30 points for two of them.
yes, yeah. So you'd be talking 140
Yeah.
for basically a full missile side.
Yeah.
And whereas with the let's say you heavy burst cannon plus, I mean, you could put smart missiles on the Riptide also, and then so that's 250. So it's 100 points more. It's not an insignificant investment, but the Riptide does have some really nice things that it can do now too. So
yeah, the that's a larger discount than I thought it was. So that's good to hear.
Let's see. Another person asks, "Are Ethereals a reliable HQ?" No more or less so than they were before. I mean, they're no tougher. They've got, if anything, they have less drone survival. There is a relic that is actually kind of nice against assault, which basically lets a ethereal be 3 inches away from where it actually was, which is kind of nifty. But again, it's a relic, so unless you want to have just that as your choice, yeah, you're giving up command points to have more of them. So
right.
But
yeah, I think that's a really cool, fluffy kind of signature system. It's like the solid state projector or solid image projector or something like that.
Yeah, that's it.
So basically you get charged and you can move the ethereal 3 inches before the charge is completed. And that's really good if your ethereal is going to die from a charge. But the application of that is a little situational at best, in that like if you want to actually use that, maybe the strategy would be have your ethereal out front and use them as bait or something. But otherwise, like if he's behind the line and you use it, like let's say he gets multi-charged and you use this to move him back 3 inches, they're still going to get in your lines, and so it's not really going to matter. Like everybody's still going to die. So like it seems to have limited use in actuality. Like it's going to save the ethereal, but everyone else might still die. So
right, but you are going to see more ethereals on the table because again, because of that commander change. If you want to run a battalion, you need 2 HQs. Now, I imagine you're probably going to see more fireblades than you are ethereals, just because of how good the fireblade bonus shot is, especially with, for example, Borkon, where suddenly you are double tapping at 18 inches.
Yeah, and then if you have the pulse accelerator drone,
yeah, you can really reach out and touch somebody and get all those extra shots. So I think you're probably going to see commanders and fireblades primarily, but you will I think you will see ethereals from time to time.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a theme of this codex, is that it feels like infantry, the Tau infantry are tweaked up quite a bit compared to their index state, not because of direct changes to how they work. The point decrease is nice, but everything surrounding them kind of props them up a little bit more than before. And so I like infantry in the new codex, and because of that, yeah, you're going to see a lot of fireblades and some ethereals as part of that.
Yeah. Let's see. Also, is there any defense against smite and smite spam? Not that we didn't have before, and that was kind of disappointing to me. Yeah. In fact, I'd say less than we have before because, as you pointed out, drones aren't 100% guaranteed to work. And I know I mentioned it in the last video I did with you that I was hoping we'd have like a talisman of Arthas Moloch or something. Absolutely not. Didn't happen. Yeah. Didn't get anything where ethereals can suddenly deny as if they were psychers, no bonus to or penalty to casting against them because Tau are effectively warp null, which actually comes up to an extent in the fluff a bit, and we'll get to that in a second because somebody asked about the 4th and 5th expansion. There's 4th and 5th spheres. So yeah, if we didn't have defense against smite before, we still don't, and there's just no two ways around it.
Yeah, I was really disappointed because I think there's a few things from Farsight Enclaves that I thought were really flavorful and consistent with the fluff that they built around that. And one of those things was the talisman of Arthas Moloch, and I was really sad that that did not make it in. But
I was also sad that in match play, there's actually no way to make the 8. No absolutely legal way to make. However, in narrative play, it's totally kosher. So it still works, and the 8 belong in narrative play rather than match. So I'm not terribly put out by it. I'm a little put out by it, but
yeah. Well, yeah, and you can't make them exactly as they are in the books because those things don't exist anymore.
Exactly. Except for fusion blades. We kept fusion blades at least.
Yeah. At least we have fusion blades.
Yeah. So okay, next question somebody asked, and I know this one has been wondered about a lot. How has the lore progressed since the last Codex, and what happened to the 4th and 5th expansions? So what 4th expansion? It never happened. I have no idea what you're talking about. At least that's what the Ethereals told me to say. But no, so after the whole Warzone Damocles and the Damocles Gulf being set on fire by the Mechanicus, the Tau have been trying to figure out how to get back across, and especially with more Necron Tomb Worlds waking up and more Tyranid Hive fleets showing up, and then the Great Rift opening up, and everything just kind of going to hell in a handbasket. The Tau are like, well, we need to enlighten the galaxy now more than ever. We need to find a solution. So a number of Earthcast scientists took some captured Imperial tech, because they know, like, well, the Imperium can seem to get across space by skipping through reality. And they also had some Kroot war spheres that they had been that had crashed and they were just kind of keeping hidden because, of course, the Kroot discovered warp technology by eating orcs. So they combined that technology to make what they called the slipstream drive, and the slipstream drive would basically cover the ship in a bubble of antimatter that would allow it to punch a quick hole through reality and go at faster than light speed by basically tearing a hole through the warp, a very small hole. And it worked fine. They were able to reduce travel time from multiple months to a few days. And so they're like, we finally have a way to cross the Damocles Gulf and get back to what we were doing. Well, they decided so they put together a massive fleet, and that was the 4th Sphere expansion. And they put Commander Surestrike in charge. He's a protege of Shadow Suns. And the scientists that actually developed the slipstream drive said, maybe we should not turn them all on at the same time. And he was assured by the Ethereals that nothing bad could possibly happen. Let's turn them on all at the same time. And the minute they did so, they basically tore a hole in reality. And the entire fleet was swallowed by this rip in reality. All the camera drones that had been watching the launch, which was being broadcast all over the Tau Empire, I might add, were either swallowed or immediately disconnected, so no one would know what happened. The populace was told that it was a great success, and they were fed false videos of the success, and the fleet was just gone. Nobody knew where it went, and they kept looking for it, but all the remaining slipstream drives were decommissioned and taken apart and never to be spoken of again. So it seemed like it was going to be an abject failure. And then a few years later, a drone pops up, basically beaming the security codes or the authentication codes from the 4th Sphere expansion. So a drone survived, and it turns out that when they got sucked into the warp, they had a rather perilous journey, and some sort of intelligence in the warp, and we don't know what yet, guided them through to the other side, and apparently it opened up so now there's a stable wormhole in the warp that's been created, and that's what's called the Startide Nexus. And so they basically were able to travel through, and on the other side, there had been some colonies set up by the survivors of the fourth Sphere expansion. However, it wasn't a safe journey, because while the Tau apparently can safely traverse the warp without a Geller field, the auxiliaries they brought with them, especially the Guevesa auxiliaries, cannot. And so they were forced to kill all of their auxiliaries that were on board. And so the survivors of the Fourth Sphere expansion do not have good feelings towards alien auxiliaries. They're very hardliners, and they've actually been censored a few times for being absolutely brutal now when they carry out warfare, because they do not trust what can happen to non-Tau. But apparently, the ships can now go through the Startide Nexus with they basically close the external shutters on all the windows. Most of the passengers are in stasis, kind of like the way Shadowsun is most of the time. And it's a skeleton crew of aircast pilots and navigator AI, but they can travel without any problem. So apparently the Tau are so warp null that they can safely travel through the warp as long as it's just them. So it's kind of interesting. Of course, now the Death Guard have discovered the other end of the Startide Nexus, and now may have a path directly into the heart of the Tau Empire. So it could go very badly soon. And so that's where we are now in the fluff.
Yeah.
Oh, and also they're still trotting Anva around as a hard light hologram, which is why his rules are he's still playable, because they're still bringing him. They still have him going out and communicating with commanders, and he has an entire entourage of Ethereals that travel with him. And there's an interesting little side story that kind of leans more on there's something physically about the Ethereals that makes everyone listen to them, because there's a story where Anva and his entourage are visiting the command center for a war going on against the forces of chaos, and it's not going well for the Tau. And an errant tank shell hits the command headquarters and kills all of the ethereal entourage. However, Anva, or the hard light hologram that is pretending to be Anva, is miraculously unharmed. And then he orders the commander to take her forces and basically buy time for a strategic retreat for everyone else by being self-sacrificial. And the commander, for the first time since Farsight, feels no need to comply. And in fact, goes to leave and join the Farsight enclaves, while the Tau send edification forces to correct everyone who witnessed it. So, yeah, so Anva may be the image of an ethereal, but it doesn't actually work like an ethereal, at least in the fluff anymore.
Right. That's when you first said that, I was thinking like a Weekend at Bernie's type thing. I mean,
yeah, just like drag him around.
Yeah.
No. I imagine there wasn't much left of him when the Colexus was done with him.
No,
so
I wouldn't think so. But yeah, maybe this is just in my head, but maybe the Ethereals put it there. But I thought there was something in the fluff about Ethereals potentially having like a chemical or like a pheromonal type of control over other casts.
Yeah, that was they actually talk about that. There was an old book the Black Library did years ago called Xenology, which was like the notes of a Mechanicus Magos who was doing a lot of like autopsies and vivisections on various captured Xenos. And yeah, they have an ethereal in there, and they never outright say it, but they mention that there's an organ the ethereal has that is very similar to an organ that another species has that has some sort of pheromone-like power of suggestion, which strongly hints that the ethereals have been engineered, and the thought is maybe by either the Eldar or the old ones. Now, how much of that is still canonical is unclear. I don't know if that book was ever considered 100% canon, but they do hint even in the Codex that is it some sort of like latent psychic ability or possibly something driven by pheromones. So that is still on the table as a possibility.
Yeah, it's weird that that if that is the case, that presumably the other ethereals created the construct of Unfa, that they wouldn't know that and like foresee that being an issue. Like, or maybe the assumption is there's always going to be other dudes around him, so we could just use their.
I think that's part of why he has an entourage with him, so that there's always a real ethereal there, but then once all the other ethereals were killed, suddenly that's no longer in play. So
right.
All right, moving on. Somebody, let's see, we've got another one about the Stormsurge versus the Riptide in the new Codex. Very different roles, and one change that did not happen is that the Stormsurge is still not a battle suit. It's a ballistic suit, so it doesn't have the battle suit trait, which also means a lot of the stratagems don't key off of it. So, I mean, it's still made of gun, so it is still. It's still a massive fire platform, and it is still our only Lord of War slot outside of a Forge World, but they serve very different roles, and I think the Riptide, I mean, besides being cheaper, comes out on top because of all the other things that can key off of it. For example, the new stimulant injector stratagem, which basically being able to treat yourself as though you are at full health, no matter where you actually are in your wound chart, is fantastic for the Riptide, because it gives you that like one turn. Yeah, I just burned myself down. Like I've been burning myself down with a Nova Reactor, or I just took a big hit, but I absolutely need to kill everything in the room. I can act like, for one command point, I can act perfect again. It's fantastic. That and Branch Nova Charge. Yeah, I mean, the Riptide is, I think, going to be much more of the utility piece, and I think you're going to see many more of those. Plus, because it's less of a points expenditure, that's more room to have more things.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and the Riptide, with the loss of stimulant injectors as a support system and moving them into a stratagem, I think the way that it works as a stratagem is a little bit more accurate to how you actually envision stimulant injectors working. It's not like, if I take a bunch of drugs, I just don't get hurt. So it's a temporary prop up, and that feels closer to the fluff in terms of what's actually happening. And in some ways it actually, is a little bit more effective, because, if you think about how many wounds a Riptide takes, you're only going to save, a couple of those, whereas the stimulant injector stratagem is essentially recovering all those wounds for one turn only. And so you do get a little bit more mileage out of it, even if it is only a temporary effect and it requires a command point. You're still getting a little bit more out of it, I think, than you do with the old stimulant injector supporting system.
Yeah, but also I would not be surprised if in 2 weeks, when the FAQ and potential errata for this book comes out, if we don't also see an errata document drop for Index Xenos 2, because thanks to the handy dandy flowchart that's in the designer's commentary, stimulant injectors old school are still a legal choice because it's an option in the index that isn't in the Codex. And that flowchart is good and bad at the same time. It's good for the game because it doesn't invalidate old models, but it's bad because it's just makes trying to keep what is and isn't the most current version of something, keeping those straight is a pain. So I would not be surprised if they issue an errata erasing those from the index.
Yeah. Because the way the flowchart works is, if there is war gear that is not in the Codex, use the index version, and the stimulant injector is kind of in a weird place because there's not war gear, but there is a stratagem with the exact same name. So yeah, I agree that it's technically still a legal choice to use the stimulant injector war gear, but I would expect them to probably change their mind on that.
Let's see, next one. Kroot and Vespid with no strats or auras affecting them. What is their value? Well, it's not entirely true. There is one stratagem that keys Kroot Hounds and Kroot together. You're not going to see it in use much, but it's kind of a nice thematic, nice to have. And that's one of the things I've always liked about stratagems in 8th, is that they are always in your back pocket. they're always there, whether it's not like something you have to plan for in advance unless it's like a pre-deployment one like the Relic one. But yeah, I think that where Kroot come in, they, like the other troops, they are cheaper now by a point, which helps. They're the only one you can take in sizes up to 20, and they start at 10. So if you're looking for cheaper chaff to throw in the way, which is, thematically how they're used, there's still a viable option for that. And I mean, considering a squad of 10 costs 50 points, it's not hard to drop in. So I think you'll still occasionally see Kroot used for bubble wrap. The downside is they don't get a lot of the other benefits. Obviously, they don't get set tenants and such. Although with the right warlord traits, you can get them. I think with the gunship diplomat warlord trait, they can get for the greater good. So you can at least get supporting fire out of them. But that's about it. But yeah, for bubble wrap and having something that can at least, if they get charged, hold their own in close combat, it's not bad. Vespid were once actually for a couple of years in a row we considered them the worst unit in the game, or one of them. They suffer now from just being in a lot of competition with other things, but Vespid are the fastest infantry unit in the game, or not in the game, sorry. They're in the fastest infantry unit in the Codex at 14 inches of movement. They can still deep strike in. And the neutron blaster is not a weapon to mess with. You can drop a squad of those in and do a lot of damage to somebody because you're at 9 inches. You'd technically be at 901, but they're assault 2 anyway, so it doesn't matter. I mean, you can still unload quite a bit of hurt on somebody with them, but you're still going to have better choices because fast attack slots still where your drones and pathfinders and piranhas reside. There's still going to be better choices, but I can at least see where, like, if you wanted to splash in a unit of Vespid, it wouldn't necessarily be bad. It just may not be the best way to take points.
Yeah, Vespid used to be bad.
Yeah,
they're not bad anymore. They just don't shine as bright as some of your other options. And like one thing that I would think that they would be good at is getting the relic, but and stuff like that, just because they're able to get to the relic quickly. But even in that situation, I think things like stealth suits are going to be a much better choice because they have the durability where Vespids don't. And that's one thing that I wish, if Vespids were a little bit more durable, I think they would have a better position. But as they are, it's hard to make an argument for taking them over other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see another one. Is it possible to not play a gun line? If I wanted to stand still and shoot, I would play guard. Is there anything that encourages mobility, especially when facing turn 1 chargers? Well, Viorla, for one thing. I mean, Viorla's gives you some of the best options for mobility by not penalizing your rapid fire weapons, by allowing you to fire assault. And Tau have a lot of assault weapons. So that one's definitely solid. There are definitely some that are better suited. Dalith is definitely more gunline oriented because it's just stand there and get cover, which I think personally makes it one of my least favorite of the set tenets because it does just encourage that static play style.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the game, especially if you play anything that has like a Maelstrom style objective, whether it's actual Maelstrom of War or there's a number of tournament formats that have Maelstrom where you need to go out and get objectives. You will basically be giving that up very quickly. But dealing with turn 1 chargers, I mean, you've got supporting fire. The Tau set is really good for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Trying to see some of the others. Farsight, if they get close enough to you, then you've got a better chance of hurting them. And also, I mean, Borkon for having more range. Going over to the Forge World, a Borkon Ivarna is one of the scariest things in the world because it can drop in near you. It can shoot you with its now 14-inch Death Flamer. And with a 14-inch range, there's nowhere that's safe from it in Overwatch.
No.
You can't charge from more than 8 inches away and suddenly be immune to it. So that one is Borkon. I'd say the my two favorite are probably Borkon and Viola. Tau is also still really solid as well, and with a lot of the named characters being Tau set anyway, you will probably see a fair amount of that as well, depending on if anybody wants to run some of the named characters.
Yeah, Tau also have the jump shoot jump relic that can give you a little bit more flexibility, which is nice.
Yes. Oh, I was going to say, yeah, that it's a shame that that's the one instance of jump shoot jump that we get in the book. Also, I'm still kind of disappointed that jetpack is a keyword, and in fact, there's one thing, the hover drone for Ethereals, that will actually give a unit jetpack. There is still nothing that keys off of it. It does nothing. There's no rule for it anywhere. So I'm still not quite sure why it's there, other than they're hoping to do something with it eventually.
Yeah, I mean, so that was one of the really low hanging fruit that I thought was for sure going to be in the Codex, like a stratagem that keys off of jetpack, and it's not there. And I thought, okay, Farside Enclave's preview is coming up, we're going to get jetpack keyword, and then it wasn't there, and I had this feeling like, oh God, no, they're not going to do anything, are they? But we did have that preview, the rumor mill image a few weeks ago of something that, call me Shirley if it's not a Tau unit that's going to be coming out down the line. So it seems like there's something in the works for Tau, and hopefully at that point they, give us a jetpack mechanism or something. But
we've always got the option, eventually from, we're not locked down on stratagems. It's not like, any codex will never see more stratagems. They could always release more stuff in a chapter approved release later, or I imagine once all the codexes are done, which is supposed to be before the end of the year, we'll start seeing campaign books come out, and I imagine we'll start to see new stratagems roll out there as well. So they may still have plans for it. We don't know, but old school Tau jump shoot jump is not part of it, at least as of right now.
That's going to be bad news for all those people that quit playing and burned all their books because commander spam was removed. But yeah.
Which actually leads me to another one. Have they done anything to make crisis suits better or more viable? And really, it's the removal of commander spam by they didn't change the points on crisis suits a bit. They didn't change the rules on them. They just have, they have stratagems that can key off of battle suits. So that helps. But yeah, other than basically having the only crisis suits you take be commanders no longer a thing, gives you a chance to maybe take more of them. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see more stealth suits, ghost keels, and riptides instead.
Yeah, I was really hoping that there's going to be like a 10-point reduction in crisis suits base cost, and then a few point reduction in each of the weapons. I really thought that would be the way that they address commander spam, is not necessarily making commanders super expensive, probably giving them a tweak to be more expensive, but not outrageously so, but then dialing down crisis suits to make them cheaper. And they didn't do that, and that also made me very sad. But yeah, so. I was
go ahead.
So, I mean, but the thing about crisis suits is, yeah, they are still very expensive. And when you consider the cost of, let's say, a unit of 3 with fusion blasters and a couple drones, and compare that to a Riptide with a heavy burst cannon, it's like they have very different roles. But if you just look at the overall output and durability of those different units, it is not an easy sell to put crisis suits in the list.
No, it's not, especially, they're competing for the same slot as ghost keels, riptides, stealth suits. So yeah, there's just other things that are they're just going to shine a little bit more. And when, you've got to figure out where to put your points, and you're going to go for some of the most efficient spot. And I mean, with all the new codexes lately, we've been kind of trying to look at what is the most improved unit. Like, for example, for Chaos Demons, we were like, well, especially for Slanesh demons, because that's what my co-host Dennis plays. Like the Mask was one of the most improved units, because suddenly the fact that she couldn't, in 8th edition, the fact that she couldn't attach to a unit before wasn't a downside, because nobody could. And some of the abilities they gave her that key off of like demonettes and things suddenly made her a very viable choice again. And Riptides are kind of that same way now, where at the beginning of 8th edition, at the end of 7th, everybody was taking Riptides everywhere. At the beginning of 8th, no one took them anymore, because the points efficiency wasn't there, because they got overbalanced. The pendulum swung too far to try to correct for the sins of 7th. And then now this version has them good, but I don't think you're going to see quite as many of them running around. I mean, they're still expensive. I wouldn't be surprised to see 2 on a list. I don't know if we'll see 3 necessarily, but
yeah, I wrote a list that did not make me feel good about myself as a person, but it included 2 heavy burst cannon Riptides, 2 Yvaras, and a bunch of fire warriors. And I feel like that list would have a fairly good chance at taking care of a lot of different opponents. But
yeah, I mean, the only thing wrong at this point with the burst cannon is the fact that it's only got that 36-inch range. Although again, if you're Borkon, that's 42. But yeah, heavy 12 going up to heavy 18, and also the 2 damage per shot now.
That's where the money's at. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And strength 6 to 7 is kind of the sweet spot right now in the game, because like 7 is like the absolute best, because you wound a lot of light vehicles on 4 and still wound a lot of other stuff on 3s. But 6 is also quite good. Anything in that like 5 to 7 range, because I mean, heavy bolters are even a really good weapon nowadays, just because they're cheap enough, and strength 5 will still wound a lot of vehicles on 5s. So,
well, and this is another place where the Tau focus fire stratagem works really well. Is there's so many things in the Tau arsenal that if you just tweak it a little bit, you're going to be able to do very just small tweaks can make a huge difference in the actual damage output. And so like Riptides, shooting with that type of mid-tier strength, and then like sniper drones and stuff like that. There's so many things that you can key off of to just get a little bit better with the way that the new wounding table works, that it actually can be quite impressive.
Yeah, and that's why there was a change to Dark Strider, so that he no longer lowers toughness, but just adds 1 to wound, and that's much better with the flattened
so much
wound.
Better.
Yeah, because -1 toughness may make no difference at all when your base weapons are already strength 5. I mean, if you're tough 4, now you're tough 3, well, I still wound you on 3s. It doesn't matter. So yeah, the +1 to wound is much better. But where the Riptide's actually going to suffer, and which is why stuff like marker light support is going to be super important, is they're still only ballistic skill 4, 4+, and their main weapons are heavy, and they don't have any ability to ignore that normally. So if they move, suddenly they're hitting on 5s, 6s if they've taken significant damage. They're going to need that plus. Yeah, they're going to need the reroll 1s, and if you can get them all the way up to 5 marker light hits, you're going to need the the +1 to hit. So yeah, it's landing the wounds is going to be the hard part. Once they land, they'll probably stick.
They can still take target locks though, right?
Yes, they can. So, and I think I'm going to double check here. Yeah, they're twice as expensive for Ghost Keels, Riptides, and Stormsurges, but yes, they can still have them.
Still worth it. I think it's still worth it.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. I mean, at 12 points
on a Riptide at least.
Yeah. I don't know about any of the others, but yeah. So that's going to be a must take on a Riptide for sure.
Yeah.
Although it was interesting to see the change they made to multi-trackers as well.
Right.
I'm not sure what the logic was behind that. What triggered that change needing to be made?
Yeah, maybe the inclusion of the word multi in the title. Like, guys, it says multi. There has to be multiple targets.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It's weird.
5 or more models. So
Yeah.
I guess it's to prevent somebody from like doing the 4, the 4 fusion blaster crisis suit and unloading on a single vehicle and basically hitting with everything automatically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, that seems like kind of low down on the list of things that I would tweak to address that. But yeah, probably.
Yeah. And I think that gets me through because most of these, like the rest of them, asking about the 8, talking about the Cold Star, can wounds still be passed off to drones in assault? Which somebody said like that seemed odd that a drone could jump in the way during an assault, not just during shooting, but it's still a wound caused by an enemy attack. So as long as the drone's within 3 inches, it's still a viable option.
Whoever thinks that that's weird has never gone to someone's house and had the dog get in between you and the person you're there to see. Like they can get in there.
Oh, they can.
Yeah. So
let's see. Any psychic defense, as we discussed, none. Did they add the keyword battle suit to the Stormsurge? Nope, not at all. Through the list, the main list of questions that our listeners had. Did you have any questions?
Well, like all my main questions that I had we've talked about, like jetpack and battle suit and everything like that. So it all the things that I was curious about, a little disappointed. But overall, I think that the Codex is, it's an improvement, right? Like even if all they did was copy and paste the index and then give us a couple warlord traits or give us the sept tenants, that would be an improvement. But they've made some significant changes in a few key areas that I think does make the army a lot stronger in general. Probably not, in a position where it's going to win every tournament, but it does give us as players a better toolkit to perform well in tournaments and not, or just, everyday games and not have to bring one specific build.
Absolutely. Obviously, a number of these changes were specifically made because of the one true Tau build that was occurring for a while, but because they're relatively small changes or a few targeted changes here and there, and then obviously, as we said, the kind of heavy-handed commander change, it is going to encourage different builds, which, that's one of the main things that I wanted out of this book. I think the set tenants go a long way, and I think they did, for the most part, what I was kind of hoping. Like I said when we talked last time, I said, the Tyranid Codex was kind of my benchmark for how the different traits making the army play differently. And I think, again, you look at the difference between Viorla and Dalith and Farsight and even Tau and Borkon will get you that different feeling. We haven't really touched on Sasea much. That one's kind of an interesting combo of +1 leadership is nice. I won't deny that. And then the interestingly worded, hopefully will be cleaned up a little bit when they release the errata, of re-rolling one failed shot per unit per shooting phase. It does make those units more consistent. It's really going to come into play on those like crisis suits or stealth suits where you've only either got one weapon or you have a couple of weapons but not a lot of shots. It's not really going to matter on your 18 burst heavy burst cannon shots or your 20 to 30, depending on how you're rolling, fire warriors. But it will, there are a few cases where it will be important, but it doesn't stand out quite as much as some of the others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's basically kind of 3 tiers of tenants, and like at the top are Borkan and Viorla, and then the second tier is closer to the first tier than the third tier, but that tier is Tau and Farsight, and then Sakase, whatever that one is, and Dalith are kind of in the bottom, and they're a little bit further removed.
Yeah.
I guess one question I did have, and this is something that I'm going to find out on Saturday, I hope, is how do you think sniper drones are looking in the new book?
it's one of the few ways we have, again, mortal wound. I mean, basically, as far as mortal wounds, it's rail weapons and the pulse bomb. I mean, the bomber is still, the Sunshark is still a viable mortal wound delivery system, especially against horde armies. And the Razor Shark is, I still don't know exactly what the role for that one is supposed to be, but as far as sniper drones, I mean, yes, you can still target characters even if they're not closest, which is useful. You inflict a mortal wound now on a roll of 6 up, so that's handy. It's still though using up a heavy support choice, and with hammerheads being cheaper, that they are a better choice. Broadsides being cheaper, they're a pretty solid choice. The Skyray is still unfortunately not terribly good. Although the change to seeker missiles gives it more potential to do straight up damage. And because it's a vehicle, you can still fire the marker lights and fire other weapons as well. So, I mean, yeah, you could get a couple of marker light hits, and again, the uplink marker light stratagem could make sure that one hit becomes at least 2, which is what you need for the because they did do some flipping around on the marker light chart a little bit, because I think they flipped cover. I want to say they flipped cover and ignoring penalties while moving.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. So you just need the 2 hits to get seeker missiles firing at ballistic skill, and your ballistic skill 3 with the Skyray. So, and at that point, you're also re-rolling 1s. So, yeah, I mean, it's slightly better, and it's got a built-in velocity tracker, so you can see kind of what they were going for with it. But it's got to compete with the hammerhead, and that's kind of a tough place to be.
Yeah, I would rather just put 2 seeker missiles on long strike, and then 2 hammerheads, and then I have the same seeker missile output as I do on a Skyray. So, and I'm hitting on 2s instead of 3s. So
the weird part about sniper drones, though, is that it's still taking up 2 different slots and 2 different force orgs.
Right.
Because you have to have the firesight marksman to really get the most out of them, and that means you're giving up an elite slot for that. So I mean, granted, a battalion gives you up to 6, so it's not as bad as it would have been otherwise, but it's still kind of a hard call to make, even though they're relatively inexpensive.
Yeah, I'm going to try them out and see how it goes. I think really the reason you would want to take them is to take out kind of those low profile characters, like IG characters, or some Eldar characters and stuff like that strength 5 has a decent chance of doing something against to begin with, and then a few more wounds and the job's done. But overall they're still going to be, I think probably their greatest strength is that they're cheap and can fill up slots. So if you need command points, they can be your buddy. And then marksmen are kind of the same thing. Like if you want a cheap Fireblade, then you can take a marksman instead. But oh no, Rob, I lost you, didn't I? Think you're gone. The Inquisition came for you. All right, we're gonna say. Oh, nope, there you are.
There, yeah. Something froze up for a bit.
Okay.
So yeah, I think we dropped where it dropped off as you were talking about. If you wanted a cheap Fireblade, you could drop them into a detachment.
Yep, that was basically it. And then I was scared and I thought something bad happened to you.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, if you want a quick spearhead detachment, you could definitely throw them in and have that work. But you have to kind of jump through a couple of hoops to take them and make them viable. Now, at small point value games, which is something we don't see talked about much, but in like a combat patrol situation, or even just like, a 1,000-point game, or if you're playing at PL where they're like the marksman's 1 and the base drones are 3, that might be a more viable choice. A standard tournament play, possibly not.
Yeah. Cool.
And also, if you're going to target characters, you've got enough mobility with other things that you can kind of move around and get past that closest enemy target by just making yourself closer to the character by working around their entourage. So,
like maybe a cold star or something. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you. That was awesome. I'm glad we got a chat about the new Codex, and I'm excited to get my hands on it on Saturday. So
it's a good book. I've enjoyed reading it. And I'm looking forward to digging in and making more lists and trying out some of the things that I've actually, and seeing how like the lists I've been using up until this point, because I have not done the 4 commander thing up until now, because I specifically did not want to. I didn't want to go in that direction. I wanted to go more of the mixed arms route. So I'm going to be interesting to see if what I've been doing up until this point will actually be more effective or not.
Yeah, and one of the nice things too is even with just with the septents, it in some ways it feels like you're getting 6 different armies. I mean, the septents, they don't make a groundbreaking or earth-shattering change to how the army plays, but they make a big enough change that you're going to want to bring different units for each sept. So it's kind of like having access to 6 new armies now, which I think is exciting. So
yeah, and that's really what you want out of like that chapter tactics style mechanic. You do want those armies that feel, yes, you're using the same units, but not necessarily in the same ways. And I think for the most part, now that they've kind of gotten past the kind of cheap and easy ones they were doing at first with the -1 to hit from 12 inches away that we saw in like 3 or 4 different books, and or seeing like the same ones repeated over and over again. Like the Tau one, we're not seeing those exactly anywhere else, which is good to see. And so I think if they can continue along this trend, I think some of the armies that are coming out now and the codexes will be coming out later will really have that extra bit of flavor. And I'm glad the Tau got that.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, anything you want to say before we head out?
No, I mean, other than thank you for having me on, and I look forward to seeing more coverage about what happens with Tau after this point.
Yeah, me too. Great. Well, thanks for being on, and everybody, happy wargaming.
Happy wargaming.